Alright, today, taking a breather from FTX and crypto for a moment here, we have a very interesting topic that is not exactly ignored by traditional media, but certainly isn't being covered with as much detail or attention as it should be, considering the implications behind what is happening and, most importantly, why it is happening. To start with, we need context and definitions. It's no secret that China, a decidedly authoritarian communist government structure, is predicated on control. Control of the people, control of information, control of domestic commerce, etc., etc. But what is less known is precisely how they maintain such control. One of the largest, most powerful tools at the disposal of the Chinese government is a system called the Great Firewall. Established in the late 1990s, the Great Firewall is a multi-layered internet surveillance and censorship initiative that allows for unparalleled control of information inside the borders of mainland China. One mechanism, for example, is a series of middle boxes installed at various different exchange points, internet exchange points, that allow for real-time tracking, surveillance, interception, and censorship of citizen activity online as it happens. Here's an example. Global technology powerhouse WeChat, similar to other domestic technology firms in China, is required by law to control or censor the activity of all of its users. WeChat is, without question, the largest market share of digital communication in all of China, and utilizing certain aspects of the Great Firewall program, they're able to monitor, delete, censor, or otherwise control peer-to-peer communication in real time. There is an extensive hash database used by WeChat, among other companies, to ensure that Chinese users simply cannot post or even receive images of protests, dissenters, anti-government figures, or even specific memes. Here's an example of a Canadian account trying to send an image to a user in China that depicts an image simply inspired by Liu Xiaobo, a Chinese political activist and writer who called for the end of China's one-party system. As you can see, the image never came through, because inserted control elements of the Great Firewall were used to censor that image in real time as it was being sent. As another example, we can look at leaked internal documents from Baidu, which is effectively the Chinese version of Google, where it was discovered that there is a lengthy list of controlled words that result in modified search results. Among those words and phrases, there are things like demonstration, petition, rights, strike, riots, or even the use of force to suppress. In essence, the Great Firewall is an unparalleled digital surveillance and control system by which the communist government dictates, effectively, everything that is seen, searched for, or discussed by Chinese citizens online. Scary? Yes. Dystopian? Absolutely. But none of this can really be seen as any sort of revelation, owing to the fact that the Great Firewall has been in use for decades, constantly updated and refined for maximum control. So why does it matter? Simply put, it matters because Apple, inadvertently I suspect, created a tool called AirDrop that circumvents the Great Firewall, making it possible for activists and political protesters to communicate, coordinate, and spread information amongst each other and the public without oversight. Such a system, by virtue of its very existence, threatens the control of communist power structures in China, which leads us to the main topic of today, Apple itself, as it rolls out hidden updates confined to a specific geographic region designed to hinder the usage of AirDrop in mainland China, as the country experiences a wave of political unrest that can really only be compared to Tiananmen Square itself. Alright, some rapid-fire information here before discussing what Apple has specifically done. First, Tiananmen Square. Tiananmen Square is often associated with iconography of a man in front of a column of tanks. This unknown protester, dubbed Tank Man, was responsible for blocking the path of Type 59 combat tanks as they left Tiananmen Square in the aftermath of a brutal government-driven massacre. This image is one of the most iconic photographs ever taken in human history, and to this very day it is viewed as a source of inspiration for Chinese activists fighting against the communist regime. Just one problem. How do you disperse iconic imagery in a totalitarian surveillance state? Answer: Apple AirDrop. The way that Apple AirDrop works is by connecting iPhones in close proximity to one another, forming their own small network of communication. This localized network avoids the Great Firewall and allows for citizens to disperse images, website links, videos, and more through direct peer-to-peer connections. That kind of system has voided the entire surveillance apparatus of the Chinese government, sort of, in a way, when it comes to localized communication, within, say, a wave of protests. To demonstrate this, look no further than Hong Kong. During widespread protests in 2019, Hong Kong activists were able to use AirDrop as a sort of rebel network bullhorn, rebel itself being a word that is also censored by the Chinese government, funnily enough, where digital flyers, posters, calls to action, organization schedules, and evidence of police brutality in both photo and video form were sent directly to the phones of visiting tourists, often originating from mainland China. Effectively, Apple had created a system that was now facilitating protests in Hong Kong, which directly interfered with Chinese political goals, while exposing Chinese citizens to information they otherwise were completely unable to get. But the damage didn't stop there. In mid-October of 2022, something happened. Similar to Tank Man in 1989, a protester now referred to as Bridge Man placed a series of banners across a major transportation hub in Beijing. He was quickly arrested, of course, but images of his protest banners began to appear worldwide, and also began to spread locally inside China through Apple AirDrop. This is where we need to analyze the problem in a somewhat abstract way, because one instance of banners being hung on a highway probably doesn't seem very impactful to a lot of viewers. The truth is, it probably wouldn't be, if it had not, by the very nature of it happening, undermined the facade of control that the Chinese government is exerting over its people. These banners, and word spreading person to person outside the control of the Great Firewall, are evidence that some people aren't happy and are willing to speak up about it, which is the most dangerous thing to an authoritarian government that they can ever face. Still, in a vacuum, that might not be enough for a full story, so let's expand our scope just a tiny bit and look at Apple's own manufacturing. Turns out that sparks often lead to fire, and Apple has now been experiencing a dramatic disruption to their iPhone production. Apple uses a company called Foxconn, headquartered in Taiwan, but Foxconn conducts major manufacturing business out of Zhengzhou City in China. After Bridgeman became an international symbol in the country, wider protests in China began to gain traction, ultimately resulting in a massive disruption to Apple's intended iPhone production schedule. The reasons behind this unrest are rather complicated, but draconian lockdown policy coupled with a breakdown of Great Firewall control at a time when Xi Jinping has just recently been re-elected for another term, which was seemingly unpopular among regular citizens, has led to widespread protest and backlash. Attempting to summarize all this properly, Apple created a system called AirDrop that accidentally undermined Chinese censorship. That system has now been used numerous times to circumvent the Great Firewall and contributed, at least in part, to a rising wave of civil unrest in China as it allowed for the spread of anti-government imagery. Having progressed to a point where the day-to-day operations of Apple itself are now affected, right, with production schedules and one of their latest releases, especially during the holiday cycle, with untold future consequences on numerous other aspects of the Chinese economy, what do we think Apple has done about it? Have they A, waited patiently, B, made a statement, C, searched out a new partner, or D, have they made subtle updates to the AirDrop system, restricted only to mainland China, that limit the functionality when it comes to communication during protests? Obviously the answer is D, because why wouldn't it be? Hidden inside iOS Update 16.1.1, which was simply described as an update including bug fixes and security updates recommended for all users, a change was made where AirDrop would be automatically disabled every 10 minutes. Before this, users could opt into receiving airdrops from close proximity phones at any point in time, right, in perpetuity. But now, every 10 minutes, the system will auto-disable, meaning that you need to constantly re-enable it to receive bulletins, images, or other material, while missing what was sent during any downtime. That may seem inconsequential, but it's not. I couldn't find any trace of this new change being announced publicly by Apple prior to the update, and only after the update had taken place and been called out by Chinese users and certain specific media publications did Apple make a statement claiming that they were fighting AirDrop spam and would be rolling out the option globally next year. Think about this. A security update that contains no indication of the change itself, a localized decision that only affects mainland Chinese citizens, and disables AirDrop every 10 minutes, after Apple has experienced setbacks in their Foxconn manufacturing plant as a result of political tension and growing protests that were in large part made possible by the very same AirDrop system they are now hindering, because it allowed for the Great Firewall to be dodged by something like 20% of Chinese citizens. That's roughly the size of Apple's smartphone market share in China. What does that change do? Simple. That change makes it infinitely harder for boots-on-the-ground protesters to organize, because AirDrop was one of their only available systems that circumvented the control of similar communication platforms like WeChat. Imagine this. A protest is occurring, the government is cracking down hard, and your iPhone AirDrop system is serving as basically the one form of digital communication that you have that isn't controlled in real time, everything you do, say, or send, by the Chinese government. Now imagine that every 10 minutes, during the chaos that ensues when police break up the masses or whatever else happens, you have to go manually re-enable AirDrop to continue coordinating and receiving updates on where to go, what to do, or how to act. That may seem small, but the reality is it will have a significant cooling effect on organized protesting, and Apple has done this exclusively in China, with what seems like a total lack of explanation, other than a public statement after the change claiming that they simply wish to curb the amount of spam that is sent through AirDrop, when people forget that the function has been turned on. Can you realistically make that argument? Sure. People who forget that AirDrop is on can have all sorts of things sent to their phone without them knowing, and the plausibility of this being a security update certainly exists if, and only if, they had clearly labeled it and rolled it out anywhere else in the world other than the country where it is actively being used right now to fight back against an oppressive government. Protests in China adversely impact Apple iPhone production. That much is just an objective fact. And currently seem to have a bit of a nexus forming around a specific Foxconn facility, where there's repeated, let's say, insurrection, as the Chinese government would call it, or protests or civil unrest, where Apple gets most of its iPhone 14 Pluses. That's the one facility they come from. At the same time, AirDrop has been and continues to be used as a sort of guerrilla organization tool, spreading content that circumvents the Great Firewall. Apple has a significant portion of its business within mainland China, not just its manufacturing, and suddenly, with alarming lack of clarity here, decides to push out an update that hurts the functionality of AirDrop in one specific way inside the only country on Earth where it is used widely for that specific purpose. Everyone can make up their own minds here, but to me it's pretty obvious. Bottom line, along with a shitstorm of other issues that Apple is currently facing, there seems to be a hidden agenda at play where the will of the people runs contrary to the will of global tech companies, like Apple, who might have just decided to throw in their lot with the Chinese Communist government to help them preserve existing power structures. At the end of the day, nothing is certain, but Apple has positioned itself in a favorable light to the CCP while undermining the function of their product for citizens beneath it. That's it though. If you want to support, please check out the links down below. Locals and Patreon for monthly subscriptions, merch, social media, etc., etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.